Hello, History of St. Louis, and welcome to the first lesson of the second unit. This new unit is called Growth of a City. So basically what we're going to do is throughout this unit, we're going to trace St. Louis history from a small little trading post to eventually becoming one of the major urban centers of the United States. And how we got that big, and then what were some of the consequences of that quick growth. So that's why this whole unit is called Growth of a City. For today's lesson, you're just going to take notes on your own based on the presentation that follows, and it should be pretty easy to follow and understand. So as we said, this unit's going to trace the growth of St. Louis. Some of the topics that we're going to hit, one of the areas that expands into the city of St. Louis will be the Soulard area, and we're going to take an in-depth look as far as what is in Soulard. We'll then take a look at the Mississippi River and its impact on St. Louis history and the age of the steamboat. We're going to take a look at religion with our saints and sinners look, and take a look at the Catholic Church and the Old Cathedral. We'll then take a look at Bloody Island, which is where St. Louis gentlemen dueled if they got into arguments with each other. For those of you who are familiar with the Hamilton story, you know all about dueling. And then in 1849, we're going to have two major disasters that are going to impact St. Louis history. One is going to be the Great Fire, and one's going to be the cholera epidemic. And because of the cholera epidemic, St. Louis is going to need some new cemeteries, and that leads to the development of Bellefontaine Calvary cemeteries. So for this slide, what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you a bunch of years, and then I'm going to give you what the St. Louis City population was. So if you want to draw the graph, you can, or you can just list the year and then the population of the city, and that's really the information that you need to have. So what we're going to do is trace the population from 1818 to 1880, even though this unit really goes up until 1860. So in 1818, so we're talking about 50 years after the beginning of St. Louis with Choteau and Laclede, St. Louis is up to 3,300 people. 2 years after that, we have about 4,600 people. So we're growing at a pretty good clip. 15 years after that, we almost double, just underneath the double factor, and we get to about 8,316, so about 8,300. And then we start to see some tremendous growth. And anytime you have the doubling of anything in a short period of time, you know you're experiencing some pretty good growth. So from 1835 to 1840, we basically double in size to 16,439. That would be probably like a good Mizzou crowd at one of their basketball games. And then another 5 years after that, we're up to 35,390. So that's a pretty nice size baseball game for the Cardinals, even though they can get up in the mid to low 40s. 4 years after that, they double to about 70,000. So that's basically like a college football game in the SEC. In 1 year, we go to about 7,700 or 77,000. And then in 20 years, we almost triple in size to 310,000. And then 10 years after that, we're up to 350,000. So in the span of the 60 years or 62 years that I have on this chart, we go from 3,300 to 350,000. So 60 years, we are seeing about 320,000 people worth of growth, or 350,000, a little under 350,000 people of growth in that time period. The sad thing about the statistics is that the city of St. Louis today, just the city, is about the same size as 1870 St. Louis. I think today the city population is right around 314,000, give or take. And so it's about 4,000 more than we had in 1870, but we are definitely well under the 1880. So 1880 St. Louis City is actually more populated than today's St. Louis. So then our next question is, why do we grow so fast? What were the factors that led us to go from 3,300 to 350,000? And so teachers may want to stop here and pause and let some brainstorming go ahead with their students and kind of guess what are factors. I'll give you a hint. There are 4 major factors, and if you know your American history, you can get at least 2, if not 3 of them. They have to deal with American history. So go ahead and pause and discuss. Or if not, here we go. So here are the 4 reasons. Number 1 is going to be immigration. Obviously, the French are the first ones here. By the early 1800s, we start to have the Germans come over. By the late 1840s, early 50s, we will have the Irish come, and then the Italians start to trickle in toward the end of this graph in the 1870s and 1880s. So immigration is a huge one, and the big 3 in the St. Louis area are going to be the Germans, the Irish, and the Italians, your GIIs. Number 2 is going to be transportation, and we will be discussing the steamboat this unit, and then we'll talk more about the railroad in the 1870s and 1880s time period when we hit that. But the steamboat allows for traffic to go up and down the river, whereas before the steamboat, you could only go downriver. But now we have the ability to go upriver, so we can travel from New Orleans to St. Louis. We can travel from St. Louis to Cincinnati. And so this makes river travel a whole lot more doable. And then the railroad obviously will allow people to travel over greater distances at a more quicker time pace. Number 3 is a historical one. That's the gold rush of 1849. We're going to find out that St. Louis becomes the gateway to the West. And so basically, if you wanted to head out west for the gold rush, you had to come through St. Louis, and that is going to bring a lot of people here, and some of them just decide to stay here. And so the gold rush of 1849 is a huge one. And then the last one is business and farming. With the Germans, they're major farmers. And for those of you who are familiar with the Herman area, you know that a lot of them come here and start growing grapes to make wine. And we have a lot of wineries basically from St. Charles all the way out to Herman, Missouri. And that is because the geography of Missouri is very similar to the geography of Germany, where they grow grapes for wine. So those are your 4 reasons why St. Louis grows so quickly. As we talk about Missouri history, Missouri is going to become a state in 1821. They have to start writing their constitution before that, and they do that in St. Louis at a hotel called the Mansion House. Today, that building is in what is now known as Laclede's Landing, and that building is now the Spaghetti Factory. And in fact, in one of those dining rooms at the Spaghetti Factory, there is a plaque that says, "In this room was created the first Constitution of Missouri." I know that the Spaghetti Factory in Chesterfield Valley is so-so from what I've heard from my students, but the Spaghetti Factory downtown has some pretty good food and has some historic value. When they made Missouri into a state, they had to have a capital. They did not want to have it in St. Louis because Missourians already thought that St. Louis was too important and that they didn't want to make it even more important. But they had to pick a city that was along the river so that people could travel here. And so they chose as our first capital St. Charles until they could build what would become Jefferson City about 5 years later. So St. Charles has the dubious honor of being the first capital of Missouri. And so we'll take a real quick look at the impact of us becoming a state. Obviously, since we became a state, then we had to have some politicians run for various offices. For the governor's race, we had famous explorer and traveler William Clark versus Alexander McNair. Uh, William Clark was from St. Louis. People in Missouri tend to not like St. Louis politicians because they think that the only thing that St. Louisans care about is St. Louis. And so they voted for somebody outside of the St. Louis area, and that is how Alexander McNair defeated one of the most famous Americans of all time for Missouri's first governor's race. For our first Senate race, for those who know their history and their government, we did not elect our senators back at this time. The state of Missouri did. And the two real major people who wanted the job was a gentleman by the name of Thomas Hart Benton and Judge JBC Lucas. These families are going to have some history behind them, and we'll talk more about that with Bloody Island. Actually, you already know about it because we talked about these two in our early families section of Unit 1, and we know that the Bentons and the Lucases had a duel. Thomas Hart Benton will shoot Judge Lucas's son, Charles, and then to make matters worse, Benton ends up becoming the first senator of Missouri, defeating Judge Lucas. So it sort of added salt to the wound, so to speak. But Thomas Hart Benton will be the first senator from Missouri. And as you know from Unit 1, he ends up being reelected 5 times, and he's the only senator from Missouri to be reelected 5 times, or the first one to be reelected 5 times in our state's history. For the city of St. Louis, shortly after that, we decided to have our first mayor's race. And so that pitted co-founder Auguste Chouteau versus William Carr Lane. How does William Carr Lane win? Basically, Chouteau gets the votes of all of the French that are still here, but William Carr Lane gets the votes of the American men, and there are more American men than Frenchmen at this time, and so William Carr Lane wins. And he goes on to be mayor for quite a number of years after this, before moving, I believe, to New Mexico. Real quickly, we're going to just focus a little bit on St. Charles. We've already studied them from Unit 1. We've already studied the city from Unit 1. But one of the things I wanted to highlight, since we talked about its importance in connection with William, Lewis and Clark, there is a famous statue of Lewis and Clark on the riverfront park known as Frontier Park. Here is a picture of me standing on the head of their dog Seaman. And this is a picture of Meriwether Lewis in the hat and William Clark without the hat. As you can see, it's a pretty sizable statue. This is in the riverfront. Right behind those trees is literally the Missouri River. So the riverfront park right there is right on the river. The first Capitol building of Missouri is this set of buildings with the American flag there. This is the first Missouri Capitol. The Peck brothers owned a hardware store on the first level, and then they decided to give the second level for free to the state of Missouri so that they could run their government there. And so that second level where the flag is, that is the Missouri Capitol building. And so your House and your Senate will be there, as well as your governor. This is a picture from the House side. It was basically 2 large rooms separated by some folding doors so that they could just easily go next door to each other once they passed a bill and let the other side debate it. I am standing in the House side, and since they have more people, there are only benches there. And then the Speaker of the House would sit at the front of the room. So that's the Speaker's chair right there. And then you have the Senate side. Because there were less senators, they could have their own seats and share tables with each other. And then you would have the President of the Senate sitting in the front of the room guiding the procedures. Here's a picture from the Senate side looking over into the House side. And then down the hallway, is the office of the governor. And so the only governor that used this room was Alexander McNair, because by the time he was done, Jefferson City was ready to go. And so this room literally was only used by one governor throughout its history. You can see the picture of Alexander McNair there on the desk. And so basically, he just waited around to sign bills or veto bills or negotiate for bills. And they only were in session for about 3 months out of the year. It was not a full-time job. It was just their civic duty to be in the government. And so they would meet here for 3 or 4 months and then go back and do their regular jobs. So here is again just another view of the governor's office, and it is literally right down the hall from where the House and Senate were. Downstairs in the first story, you had the Peck Brothers hardware store. And so this is a reenactment of some of the things that would have been sold at the Peck Brothers hardware store. You can see a whole bunch of fur traps or animal traps for fur trapping up here. You can see the pelts that would have been available. I believe that is skunk. That looks like coyote. Looks like this might be a badger, maybe this a beaver, some beavers right here. Not quite sure. My fur identification skills are not what they used to be. And then you would see all sorts of other hardware items on the shelves that they would have had. I know behind me when I took my picture, they also had what beds would have looked like back in the day. They did not look very comfortable and would have had some other household items that you could have purchased, including jugs and jars to store things. So that's a look at our growth of the city. Our next lesson will be the Soulard and how Soulard becomes incorporated into St. Louis. Hope you enjoyed. Thanks for listening.